chasing success, always one more goal, always one more hour, and still, it never feels like enough. But grace says you already are, loved, held, free to rest.
They told us successful people wake up at 5 a.m. So I woke up at 5 a.m. and nothing changed, except I was tired earlier. I didn't unlock success, I unlocked fatigue. That's the kind of promise of grind culture, right? Wake up earlier, work harder, sleep less, grind now, live later. But if that actually worked, a lot of us wouldn't be this exhausted. So today we're talking about grind culture and what it promised and what it delivered and why so many people are quietly done with it. Grind culture promised freedom. It promised success. It promised that if you just sacrifice enough now, life would magically get better later. And somewhere along the way, exhaustion became a flex. We turned busy into a personality trait. People don't even ask how you're doing anymore. They ask how busy you are. Here's the problem. You can't pay rent with ambition. My landlord doesn't accept passion as payment. I tried explaining my vision to my landlord, and he explained late fees. Grind culture says work harder. My landlord says, cool, where's my money? Burnout isn't weakness. Burnout is what happens when humans try to live like machines. At first, you're motivated, then you're tired. Then even things you love feel heavy. At some point, coffee stops being a drink and just becomes emotional support. And you didn't lose motivation, you lost sleep repeatedly. Grind culture assumes we can run forever. But humans aren't built for non-stop output. Creativity fades, joy disappears, work becomes survival instead of purpose. Grind culture doesn't build lives, it burns them. It keeps you busy, but not fulfilled. Now here's the difference nobody talks about. Grind culture, always more, never stop, worth equals output, sustainable living, consistency over intensity, energy you can keep, a life you don't need to escape from. Grind culture wants you sprinting a marathon. Sustainable living wants you to actually finish it. This is where a lot of people are right now, still grinding, still tired, still wondering why it isn't working. If grinding harder was the answer, wouldn't we feel better by now? If doing more was the solution, wouldn't we have peace? Maybe the problem isn't that we're not doing enough. Maybe the problem is we were never meant to live like this. If hustle culture doesn't know how to give rest, then where does real rest actually come from? Because if waking up earlier fixed everything, we would all be well-rested millionaires by now. But instead, we're tired. So today we're answering that question. Now this isn't a lecture, this isn't pressure. This is about unlearning some things that sound impressive, but quietly wear people down and replacing them with something that actually lasts. Now the scripture describes life as a race, but not the kind of race grind culture talks about. Paul never described life as a sprint. He talked about endurance, about finishing well, about staying the course, not about burning out halfway and collapsing on the track. And if this were a sprint, most of us would have pulled a hamstring by now. Grind culture teaches some very convincing myths. And let's just expose a few. The first myth would be faster is better. If you're not moving fast, you're falling behind. The truth is, Paul didn't say run as fast as possible. He said run so that you may finish. Speed doesn't matter if you don't make it to the end. Rest means you're weak. Grind culture treats rest like failure. The truth is, even in scripture, rest is not optional. God built rest into creation, not because we're lazy, but because we were human. Myth 3, more effort equals more worth. The world ties your value to your output. The truth is, your worth was never something you had to earn. You don't run to become loved. You run because you already are loved. Let's talk about something grind culture really doesn't like. Shabbat. A full stop, a pause, to cease, a reminder that the world keeps spinning even when you rest. Shabbat isn't about rules, it's about trust. It's saying, I don't have to hold everything together. Shabbat is basically God saying, sit down, I've got this. Grind culture says if you stop, everything will fall apart. Shabbat says stop and watch God still work. Grind culture says carry it all. Shabbat says lay it down. Grind culture says never rest. God literally commands rest. Fourth commandment, and that should tell us something. This is where Yeshua's words make so much sense. In Matthew 11:28, come to me all who are weary and burdened and I'll give you rest. Not a break, not a distraction, rest. The kind that reaches your soul. Grind says try harder. Grace says come closer. Grind says prove yourself. Grace says you're already known. Grind culture turns life into a performance. Grace turns life into a walk. You don't sprint with God. You walk with Him. Paul talked about finishing the race. Again, not collapsing, not burning out. Finishing with faith intact, with joy intact, with love intact. That's not hustle, that's faithfulness. So if you're tired, that doesn't mean you're failing. It means you've been sprinting a race that was meant to be walked. You're allowed to slow down. You're allowed to rest. You're allowed to trust God with the outcome. You were never meant to grind your way to peace. The race was never about speed. It was about direction. It was about trust. And it was about finishing well. You don't need to hustle harder. You don't need to sprint faster. You need to walk faithfully and rest deeply. If rest isn't the end goal, then what comes after rest? Now here's something grind culture gets wrong. It thinks purpose comes before rest. Scripture teaches the opposite. Rest comes first, so you don't burn out before you ever finish what you were meant to do. Now Paul talks about life like a race, right? But not the kind of race we imagine. Not a sprint, not a competition to see who collapses last. A race that requires endurance, direction, and wisdom. Paul never said, run as fast as possible and hope for the best, because if that were the goal, most of us would have been spiritually limping by chapter 2 by now. Paul understood something we ignore. You can run fast and still fail to finish. Speed without endurance leads to burnout, and burnout doesn't just stop your body, it clouds your purpose. You can be passionate and still burn out. You can be sincere and still exhaust yourself. Good intentions don't replace wisdom. Grind culture says, go harder. Paul says, run wisely. Grind culture says, never stop. Paul talks about discipline, focus, self-control, not chaos, not panic, not constant exhaustion. If your calling requires you to destroy yourself to keep it, something's off. The early followers of the way didn't live like grind culture. They practiced rhythm, work, rest, prayer, community. They understood something that most of modern culture forgets. Rest wasn't a reward. It was part of obedience. They stopped regularly, not because the work wasn't important, but because God was. Purpose doesn't come from panic. It comes from clarity, and clarity comes from rest. And when you're rested, you can actually hear direction. When you're exhausted, everything feels urgent, even the wrong things. Now remember, rest doesn't delay your purpose. It protects it. Purpose isn't about doing everything. It's about doing what you were called to do faithfully. Paul didn't say he did everything. He said he finished his race. That's focus, that's peace, that was purpose. So if you've rested, now you walk forward, not sprint, with consistency, trust, obedience, and endurance. You don't chase purpose, you walk in it. Grind burns people out. Rest restores the soul. Purpose flows from rest. And that's the order, and that's the rhythm, and that's the way. The race isn't about who runs fastest, it's about who finishes faithful. Rest well, walk wisely, finish strong. Now, one of the biggest lies of burnout culture is the idea that doing more will somehow refill us. Work harder, push longer, sleep less, give more, but burnout culture never fills your cup. It only empties it. You can grind, hustle, and push yourself to the limit and still feel empty inside. And that's because constant output without renewal always leads to depletion. You are never designed to pour endlessly without being refilled. We often hear people say you can't pour from an empty cup, and it's true. When your cup is empty, you become irritable and you lose patience, you lose clarity, you lose joy, and even good things start to feel heavy. But when your cup is full, you give freely, not resentfully. You serve with joy, not pressure. You love without burning out. And God never calls us to live empty. He calls us to live filled. Now, burnout culture versus God's design, you see, burnout culture says, give until there's nothing left, and rest only when you collapse, and your worth comes from output. But God's design says, be filled so you can give. Rest before you break. Your worth comes from relationship. Burnout culture focuses on production. God focuses on connection. Think about your phone for a minute here. When your phone hits 1%, panic sets in. You stop scrolling, you stop watching videos, you start looking for one thing, the charger. You don't shame the phone. You don't yell at it to try harder. You don't tell it to be more disciplined. You grab the cord, you find the outlet, because you understand something important. The phone doesn't generate its own power. We are the phone. God is the outlet. Communion with God is the cord. Prayer is essential because prayer is how we reconnect to the source. Without connection, we drain, we glitch, and we shut down. No amount of effort replaces connection. Prayer isn't religious performance. Prayer is recharging. It's how we refill our cup, we restore our strength, we realign our heart, and we receive peace. Just like a phone can't stay alive without being plugged in, we cannot stay spiritually alive without staying connected to God. Plain and simple. Burnout happens when we try to live disconnected from the source. Peace flows when we stay connected. And God was never meant to be the last resort. He was meant to be the power source. We don't recharge once and then stay full forever. We stay connected so we can pour into other people. When our cup is full, we can pour into others without resentment, and we can serve without exhaustion, and we can love without running dry. And God fills us, not so we hoard it, but so it can overflow into other people too. Burnout culture says drain yourself dry. God says come and be filled. Stay plugged in, stay connected, refill your cup daily, because only God can fill what the world keeps emptying. Even the world's most successful people rest. One of the biggest lies of burnout culture is the idea that rest is weakness, that if you slow down, you'll fall behind, that if you stop, everything will collapse, that grinding nonstop is the price of success. But when you actually look at the people making the biggest decisions in the world, a different picture shows up. Take Winston Churchill. This was a man leading a nation through World War II, and he scheduled daily naps. He believed rest helped him think clearly and make better decisions. He once said exhaustion leads to poor judgment. If resting was necessary for someone managing a global war, it's probably not laziness for the rest of us. Then there's Jeff Bezos. He protects sleep, avoids early meetings, and says his best decisions come from being well rested, not rushed, not frantic, clear. Because when decisions affect millions of people, clarity matters more than speed. Even Elon Musk, who's often used as the poster child for extreme work, has admitted that sleep deprivation hurt his judgment and led to bad decisions. And grinding harder didn't make him better, it made things worse. Even Warren Buffett, he works calm hours, reads most of the day, avoids chaos, and he famously said that being busy doesn't mean being effective. Now here's the pattern. The world tells everyone else to grind nonstop, but the people at the top protect rest. Because rest isn't laziness, it's maintenance, it's wisdom, it's endurance. And that lines up perfectly with what Scripture has been saying all along. Paul never described life as a sprint. He described it as a race that must be finished, not fast, faithful. That's why rest matters. That's why Shabbat exists. That's why Yeshua invites the weary to come and receive rest. Burnout culture says go faster. Wisdom says finish well. Even the world understands that rest protects purpose. How much more would God? Burnout isn't proof you're dedicated, it's proof you're human. And with that being said, y'all can go in peace, and peace be with you.